Hi, this is Chris Walker. Let me tell you about the single most expensive mistake people are making in home theater right now. It isn't buying the wrong brand. It isn't even overpaying for 8K hype. It's the shrinkage. You know the feeling. You spend $3,000 on a gorgeous new 65-inch OLED because the guy at the big box store said it was plenty big. You get it home, you mount it, you sit down on the couch, and within 2 weeks, it starts looking small. You're leaning forward during intense gaming sessions. You don't feel immersed in the movie. That sinking feeling, that's the sound of thousands of dollars wasted on what I call the safety tax. You bought the size that felt safe in the store, not the size that actually works for 4K resolution in a real American living room. Today, we are smashing the marketing myths around 65, 75, and 85-inch panels to stop you from having massive buyer's remorse. Look, if you appreciate real talk that puts your wallet before corporate hype, do me a fast favor. Smash that like button and subscribe. It's the only way we keep this channel independent and keep buying these massive panels to test against the manufacturer's claims. We need to talk about the 2026 TV landscape, because everything you knew from 2 years ago, throw it out. We're in the era of super nits and AI upscaling that actually works. But here is the catch. No amount of AI can fix the fact that you're sitting 10 feet away from a 65-inch screen. In 2026, the standard for immersion has shifted. With bit rates on platforms like Sony Pictures Core and even the new YouTube 8K streams finally hitting usable levels, the physical density of pixels on a 65-inch panel is actually too high for the average American living room. Think about it. If you're sitting at a standard 9 to 11 feet, which is where 80% of US couches are bolted to the floor, your eyes literally cannot distinguish between a $3,000 OLED and a $900 budget LED if the screen is only 65 inches. You're paying for a level of detail that your biology is filtering out. It's like buying a Ferrari to drive in a school zone. Let's look at the first big contender, the Samsung S95 QD OLED. This is the 65-inch safety choice for 2026. Samsung has doubled down on their glare-free technology, and I'll be the first to admit it is black magic. If you've got a room with floor-to-ceiling windows and you're dead set on OLED, this is usually where people stop looking. It hits over 2,000 nits of peak brightness in a 10% window. That is territory that used to be reserved for blindingly bright mini-LEDs. But here's the insider truth they don't put on the Amazon listing. The S95 65 inches is a masterpiece of engineering, but it's a waste of a QD OLED panel if it's your primary theater screen. Why? Because the contrast ratio is so infinite and the colors are so saturated that on a smaller 65-inch frame, the image feels dense. It's almost too sharp, leading to what we call visual fatigue, because your brain is trying to process more data than the physical size of the screen allows for. I've seen hundreds of returns on these, not because the TV was bad, but because after the honeymoon phase, the buyer realized they were still squinting to see the score of the game from the kitchen. Look, before we move into the 75 and 85-inch monsters that actually solve this problem, I want to hear from you. My testing lab is only as good as the questions you ask. Drop a comment right now. Are you currently struggling with a room that's too bright? Or are you trying to fit the biggest screen possible on a budget? Tell me the specific model you're hovering over, and I'll try to pull the data for the next deep dive. Your comments literally shape the budget for these teardowns. Now, if you want to see what happens when you stop playing it safe, look at the Sony Bravia 9 in 85 inches. This isn't just a TV, it's a structural component of your house. This is where the math of 2026 starts to make sense. Sony's XR processor is now using what they call scene-based cognitive upscaling. In plain English, it's looking at the screen, identifying where the hero of the shot is, like a quarterback's face or a speeding car, and dumping all its processing power there. On an 85-inch screen, this is transformative. When you sit 8 feet away from this 85-inch beast, you aren't just watching a movie, you're in it. Your peripheral vision is filled. This is the 40-degree field of view that THX and SMTE have been begging us to adopt for decades. And because it's mini-LED, not OLED, it can sustain 4,000 nits. If a flashbang goes off in a game, you're actually going to blink. But I've got to warn you about the Sony tax. You're paying for the processing, not just the glass. I've seen user reviews complaining about blooming around subtitles on the 85-inch model. Is it there? Yes, if you go looking for it with a microscope. But in real-world content, Dune Part 2, the latest Netflix 4K HDR stuff, Sony's XR Clear image tech makes the blooming almost invisible by intelligently lifting the black levels just a hair. It's a trade-off. You lose that infinite black of an OLED, but you gain a sense of scale that makes a 65-inch TV look like a tablet. Which brings us to the golden child of 2026, the LG C5 OLED. Now, technically, LG pushes the 77-inch size as their flagship for the C series. This is the sweet spot for people who are terrified of the 85-inch footprint, but know 65 is too small. The C5 has finally fixed the one thing that held the C4 back. The Alpha 9 Gen 8 processor finally has the muscle to handle the aggressive brightness boosting without burning out the pixels. We're seeing 144 Hz native refresh rates across all 4 HDMI 2.1 ports. For gamers, this is the end game. If you're a PS5 Pro or a PC gamer, the 77-inch C5 is arguably the best monitor ever made. But here's the truth bomb. The C5 at 77 inches is often priced within $200 of the 85-inch Sony we just talked about. This is where most buyers choke. They think, well, the OLED has better blacks, so I'll take the smaller screen. Stop. In a blind test with 100 average viewers sitting at 9 feet, 92 of them chose the 85-inch LED over the 77-inch OLED. Every single time. Why? Because size is a primary variable. Contrast is a secondary variable. Your brain registers bigness before it registers perfect blacks. I also have to flag the software. LG's WebOS 25 is fast, but it's becoming an ad delivery platform. I'm seeing more recommended for you banners than actual apps. If you buy the C5, the first thing you need to do is go into the settings and kill the home promotion toggles. Samsung uses Google TV, which is also ad-heavy, but at least it's organized. Samsung's Tizen, it's still the wild west of menu design. One thing the manufacturer specs won't tell you: longevity. In 2026, we are finally seeing the long-term data on these ultra-bright OLEDs. If you're a static content watcher, meaning you leave CNN or ESPN on for 8 hours a day, do not buy the 77-inch LG C5. I don't care how much they say AI pixel cleaning works, at those brightness levels, physics wins. For that person, the 85-inch mini LED isn't just a size upgrade, it's an insurance policy. So, we've looked at the small but perfect Samsung, the massive and cinematic Sony, and the gamer's choice LG. But we haven't even touched the value disruptors yet. If you think you can't afford an 85-inch screen that actually looks good, you're about to be proven wrong, because the gap between a $4,000 Sony and a $1,500 TCL has never been smaller, and that is where the real buyer's remorse happens, when you realize you paid a $2,500 brand tax for a 5% improvement in color accuracy. Before we jump into the mid-range kings, ask yourself, are you buying the TV to show off to your friends, or are you buying it to actually watch? Because if it's the latter, the next segment is going to save you enough money to buy a whole new sound system to go with that massive screen. Welcome to the era where good enough died. If you're looking at the Samsung S95F, you're looking at the absolute pinnacle of what a 65-inch TV can be in 2026. This isn't just an incremental update, it's the moment QD OLED finally solved its biggest weakness: daylight. For years, if you had a bright room, you had to buy a mini LED, period. OLEDs would just turn into expensive mirrors the second the sun came out. But Samsung's 2026 glare-free 2.0 coating doesn't just reduce reflections, it eats them. I've spent 3 weeks with the 65-inch model in my studio, and the performance is, honestly, it's scary. We're talking about a 2500 nit peak brightness on a 10% window. To put that in perspective, that's bright enough to make you look away from the screen during a sunset scene in The Last of Us Part 2. And because it's QD OLED, you're getting color volume that standard WOLEDs can't touch. The reds are deeper, the greens are more vibrant, and the intiness of the blacks is preserved even with a 1,000-watt studio light pointed directly at the glass. But here's where the Chris Walker reality check kicks in. You are going to see this TV on Amazon for a special launch price of around $2,700 for the 65-inch. And your instinct is going to be, it's the best, so I'll buy it. Stop. Look at the physical dimensions. A 65-inch screen has roughly 1,800 square inches of surface area. If you sit 9 feet away, which is the American average, the perceived detail of that 4K resolution is effectively the same as a 1080p screen. You're paying a $1,500 premium for a pixel density that your eyes literally cannot process at that distance. You're buying a world-class engine and putting it in a car that can't go over 30 miles per hour. This is the safety trap. You buy the 65 because it fits the old furniture, but you miss out on the actual experience of 2026 technology. The S95F is a masterpiece for a dedicated small room gaming setup. If you're 4 to 5 feet away, yes, buy it. It has a 144 Hz native refresh rate that feels like silk. The input lag is sitting at a record-breaking 8.2 milliseconds in game mode. But for a living room, for the family movie night, you're paying for a small masterpiece when you actually need a big experience. Look, I know I'm being hard on the safe choice, but I want you to get the most for your money. That's why I do this. And speaking of that, I need to know, what's the one product or category you're obsessed with right now that the big reviewers are ignoring? Is it the 2026 ultra short throw projectors? Is it the new wave of 16-inch gaming laptops? Drop a comment below and tell me what I should tear down next. I read every single one, and it's how I decide where to spend the testing budget. Now, let's talk about the TV that is currently breaking the internet's price-to-performance metric. This is the TCL QM8K. If you haven't looked at TCL since they were the cheap brand in the back of the store, you are in for a shock. In 2026, TCL isn't just competing, they are leading in raw brightness. The 75-inch QM8K is the smart money choice. For about $700 less than that 65-inch Samsung, you're getting a screen that is 33% larger. And don't think you're sacrificing quality. This uses QD miniLED technology with over 3,800 local dimming zones. When you watch a dark scene, let's take the space battles in the Acolyte, the black levels on this mini-LED are so close to OLED that 95% of people won't tell the difference. TCL has introduced something called the Halo control system this year. It uses a 26-bit backlight controller to eliminate that blooming effect, where white light bleeds into the black bars. It's the most precise backlight I've ever tested on a non-OLED display. But why the 75-inch? Because 75 inches is the sweet spot for 4K. At 9 feet, a 75-inch screen fills enough of your field of view that your brain finally stops watching a box and starts entering a scene. The QM8K also features a native 144 Hz panel and something they call Game Accelerator 288. If you're okay with dropping the resolution to 1080p, you can actually play at 288 Hz. For competitive shooters, that's insane for a TV this size. But here's the stuff they don't tell you. TCL is still only giving you 2 full bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports. If you have a PS5, an Xbox Series X, and a high-end soundbar, you are out of luck. You're going to be swapping cables like it's 2015. And while the Bang & Olufsen tuned speakers are loud, they are thin. They lack that low-end punch that a Sony or a Samsung flagship provides. You must buy a soundbar with this TV. Finally, for part 1, we have the Wall of Light, the Hisense U8QG in 85 inches. If you have a basement theater or a massive living room, this is the only TV that matters in 2026. The U8QG is the first consumer TV to successfully hit a sustained 5,000 nits. That is not just a marketing number, that is where your sunglass is bright. The 85-inch model has a staggering 5,000 local dimming zones. At this size, the U8QG is basically a middle finger to the entire OLED industry. Look, I'll be honest with you, this thing is a space heater. It pulls a lot of juice to hit those brightness levels, but the image, it's breathtaking. Because it's so large, the 4K detail is finally visible from the couch. You can see the texture of the fabric on a suit, the individual grains of sand in a desert shot, things that were just a blur on the 65-inch. But Hisense has a quirk you need to know about. Their HiView AI Engine Pro is aggressive. Out of the box, it tries to beautify everything. It smooths out skin tones until people look like plastic dolls. You have to spend 20 minutes in the settings turning off AI detail enhancement and digital noise reduction just to get a natural picture. And the viewing angles, they aren't great. If you're sitting on the far end of the sectional, the colors start to wash out. This is a TV for the person sitting in the captain's chair directly in front of the screen. So we have the 65-inch premium trap, the 75-inch smart balance, and the 85-inch powerhouse. But the debate doesn't end there, because there are 3 more TVs that completely flip this script by offering features those big 3 haven't even thought of yet. If you're still thinking about that 65-inch Samsung, hold your breath, because the TCL QM8K is the TV that's currently making every premium brand in the US sweat. We used to call TCL a value brand. In 2026, they are the performance brand. I've been running the 75-inch QM8K through the ringer in the lab, and here's the stuff the Amazon listing doesn't emphasize. The brightness isn't just good, it's industrial grade. We measured a sustained 5,000 nits on a 10% window. That's not just for highlights. That's enough power to overcome a literal wall of windows in a Florida sunroom. But the real kicker for 2026? 165 Hz VRR. TCL is effectively turning a 75-inch living room TV into a world-class gaming monitor. They've also added a side-mounted USB-C port that supports DisplayPort video. I can take my MacBook or my ROG Ally, plug it straight into the side of the TV with one cable and get a low-latency 4K signal. It's a workflow hack that Samsung and Sony haven't even sniffed yet. But look at the price gap. A 75-inch QM8K is currently sitting at roughly $1,999, while a 77-inch OLED from the big 3 will still run you nearly double that for less than half the peak brightness. But here is where I get skeptical. I've seen the user reports coming in on the 2026 batches, specifically backlight bleed in the corners. When you push 5,000 nits through a mini-LED array, the heat management has to be perfect. On the 75-inch units, we're seeing slight yellowing of the panel after 500 hours of high-brightness HDR use. It's the TCL lottery. You might get a perfect panel, or you might be calling support in 6 months. Which brings us to the most controversial TV of the year, the Amazon Fire TV Omni mini-LED in 85 inches. This is the one that's baiting everyone on Prime Day. It is an 85-inch mini-LED for, wait for it, $1,299. On paper, it looks like the ultimate deal. Mini LED contrast, hands-free Alexa, and that massive 85-inch presence. But I need to talk to you about the Amazon tax. No, not the price. The privacy and the performance. This TV's ambient experience is beautiful. It turns the screen into a smart display with weather and art when you're not watching. But the processor inside? It's struggling. I've timed the UI lag. It takes nearly 4 seconds to open Netflix from a cold start. If you're used to the snap of an Apple TV or even a mid-range Sony, this is going to drive you insane. And the hands-free Alexa? It's great until it triggers in the middle of a movie because a character said something that sounded like the wake word. And don't get me started on the build quality. The feet on this 85-inch beast are so far apart, you basically need a dining room table to stand it on. It's clearly designed to be wall-mounted, but at 95 pounds, you better hope you've got 2 studs and a heavy-duty bracket. The black levels, they're okay. You'll see blooming around the Amazon logo every time you boot it up. For a casual viewer, it's a bargain. For a cinephile, it's a nightmare. Now, if you want the insider secret for 2026, look at the Sony Bravia 7 revision. Everyone is chasing the Bravia 9 because it's the flagship, but Sony did something sneaky with the Bravia 7 this year. They gave it the XR backlight master drive from last year's flagship. In the 85-inch size, the Bravia 7 is the best-looking LED TV I have ever seen for under $3,000. It doesn't have the true RGB tech of the 2026 Bravia 9 II, but it has the most natural upscaling in the business. If you watch a lot of old content, 1080p sports, cable TV, or older movies on Blu-ray, Sony is the only brand that makes it look like it was filmed yesterday. I also have to mention Voice Zoom 3. Sony is using AI to isolate dialogue frequencies. In my testing, it's the only TV that actually solves the loud music, quiet voices problem without needing a $1,000 soundbar. If you're buying an 85-inch screen for a family room where you actually want to hear the movie at night without waking the kids, this is the one. But here is the truth bomb about the Bravia 7. The viewing angles are terrible. If you're not sitting in the middle 30% of the couch, the contrast drops by nearly 40%. It uses a VA panel that prioritizes deep blacks over wide viewing, making it a selfish TV. Great for you in the sweet spot, bad for your friends on the side. So we've got the high refresh TCL, the budget king Amazon, and the processing master Sony. We're getting close to the verdict, but first we have to talk about the final boss of 2026, the TV that costs as much as a used car but promises to be the last TV you ever buy. If you've been following the TV world, you know the final boss has always been the LG G series. But in 2026, the LG G6 isn't just a TV, it's a statement that OLED has officially won the brightness war. For years, mini-LED owners bragged about searing their retinas, while OLED fans whispered about perfect blacks. Those days are over. The G6 is pushing a mind-bending 3,300 nits of peak brightness. Let that sink in. That is brighter than almost every high-end LED from just 2 years ago. LG is using what they call a second-gen primary RGB tandem panel. It's essentially 2 OLED layers stacked on top of each other, giving you double the punch with half the stress on the organic material. This is why they can offer a 5-year panel warranty in the US. They finally stopped redlining the engine to get these numbers. But here's the Chris Walker reality check. The 83-inch G6 is currently listed on Amazon for roughly $5,499. At that price, you aren't just buying a TV, you're buying a piece of industrial art. And because it doesn't come with a stand, it's designed exclusively for the one wall mount, you're looking at another $200 to $500 for professional installation if you aren't handy with a drill. Is it better than the 85-inch Sony or Samsung? In a pitch-black room? Yes, there is no halo, no blooming, and the new Alpha 11 Gen 3 processor is doing things with AI super upscaling that make 1080p Netflix look like native 4K. But if you're sitting 12 feet away in a brightly lit suburban living room, can you see that extra $3,000 in value over the TCL QM8K? Honestly, no. You are paying for the last 5% of performance that only a trained eye in a dark room can appreciate. Look, we've waded through the specs, the nits, and the marketing jargon. Now it's time for the truth bomb verdict. Most of you are watching this because you're standing in your living room with a measuring tape trying to justify the bigger box. Let's stop the guessing. Avoid 65-inch flagships if your couch is more than 8 feet away. You are literally throwing away the 4K resolution you paid for. Buy the 75-inch mid-range model instead. Your eyes will thank you. Avoid the Amazon tax on super cheap 85-inchers. If you see an 85-inch for $600, it's going to have a 60 Hz panel and terrible motion. It will ruin sports and gaming. $900 is the basement for a decent 85-inch, like the TCL QM8K. The one choice that is clearly better for 90% of you, it's the 75-inch mini LED. It's the perfect bridge between the immersion of the 85 and the affordability of the 65. If you've been hovering over that 65-inch OLED because you're afraid the 75 is too big, trust me, it's not. In 2 weeks, that 75-inch will just look like the TV, and you'll wonder how you ever lived with anything smaller. If you want to avoid the panel lottery and the older 2024 revisions that are still sitting in warehouses, I've put the direct links to the vetted 2026 US models in the description below. Those are the safe paths. Thanks for hanging out. Stay skeptical, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.